Welcome to another edition of Newsline 360. We have part 2 of our interview with political analyst Peter Wickham. This week, we'll speak about the state of politics in St. Kitts and Nevis, starting with the ascension of the leadership of Natasha Shani Gray Brooks as leader of the People's Action Movement.
I think that certainly she, as I listened to her, her ability to speak and communicate, she's a less effective communicator than Dr. Drew. But the comparison, I think, is probably more appropriate with the leadership of the NRP in Nevis. I think that that is the better comparison in the sense that the individual is relatively new to politics. And essentially, it's a situation where you're trying to create a successful leader that doesn't have the baggage of anyone in the past. And I think this is what was done with Dr. Drew, and presumably this is what they're hoping to do with Ms. Gray Brooks. And I'm anxious to see how it works out for them. But certainly, she doesn't appear to be as attractive politically as Dr. Drew is. But I think that there are other aspects of her attractiveness, and one of them is the fact that she is new to politics. She's relatively clean politically. She seems reasonably articulate, although I don't compare her favorably with Dr. Drew. But in time that may very well also evolve. But as I said, she seems to have a lot more in common with the leadership of the NRP in Nevis, to the extent that she seems to have a political history. In terms of one could say political pedigree to some extent, and maybe that is what they are trading on. To be honest, I think that it's a reasonable position for PAM to take. If PAM is saying we're going to turn a new leaf, we're going to turn over, and we are going to rid ourselves of the baggage of the past, and we're going to move forward in a completely different way. Who better to do it than someone who is not saddled with any of the baggage? So let me congratulate her. I don't think it was a huge surprise because there was no one else that was interested in the job. And it's interesting that you had a number of the other political characters that we were expecting to be involved completely back away from the politics of PAM. So if you look at all of the key players in the previous PAM government, Shawn Richards included, all of these individuals backed away, the Lindsey Grants and the Jonelle Powells, all of them have backed away from this and essentially paved the road for this lady to come forward, which says to me that PAM has made the decision that it wants to turn a new leaf and that it is walking in a completely different path. And I think that presents it with huge opportunities in terms of the way that the philosophy, the party is shaped, and the way that their politics is evolving. It presents amazing opportunities for them to be able to do things very differently this time around. One can only wish them well.
Yeah, I actually, that was going to be my next question, that because there was a lot of talk in the past about Jonelle Powell being the heir apparent of the leadership. He served as chairman of the party. He served in government. And so I think a lot of people probably thought that Jonelle would have thrown his hat in the ring. But judging from what you're saying, you believe that the party decided to just turn a new page, not to be associated with any baggage from the past, which could include a Jonelle Powell and maybe a Lindsey Graham. Well, Lindsey Graham was there before, but Jonelle Powell in particular.
Yeah, I mean, and I hear you. I thought to I have to admit that or confess that I was one of those people who assumed that Jonelle Powell would be the person that would pick up the baton and would run with it coming out of the situation. I tried unsuccessfully to get him to comment directly. I mean, he does communicate with me from time to time in relation to his interest in PAM, and he has not been willing to comment, to have a conversation in that regard. And when I look at conversations with people like yourself, it's significant that Jonelle Powell is absent from public discourse in relation to PAM and his interest in PAM. I guess when you see all of that together, what it really means is that, it's not high on his list of priorities and he has other things to concern himself with. No, which is perfectly fine. I mean, he's a person who a lot of people had expectations of him that ultimately didn't materialize. And in the same way that I said it for Richards, I think a politician, one has to admire when a politician realizes, look, this is not my time. He's clearly made that decision and he's moving on and making space. But like you, I thought that he would have been the future of PAM. And I was really surprised that he hasn't shown an interest. But it's interesting that since the defeat, Jonelle Powell has stepped out of the limelight. He has avoided public and private public interviews and private conversations with persons like myself about the extent to which he might be interested in it. So I think that we're left to assume that for the time being, he has no interest, and he's focusing on his relatively lucrative law practice, and maybe that for him is the way forward. Maybe in another 10 years or so, he's a young person, he may decide, okay, I'm gonna pick this up again. But for now, I think that he's closed the chapter, as is the case with Lindsey Grant, who seemed to have taken that decision a while ago as well.
Yeah, I actually was wondering, and I was going to pitch to you, but I think you kind of answered the question, whether or not you think he would want to run even in the next election in a few years' time, or would he just finish with politics altogether?
Perhaps that's a question that is evolving, and maybe when he sees the situation, I mean, you have about 3 or 4 years to go.
3 or 4 years.
When you see the situation evolving and there are opportunities that present themselves, then maybe he will want to come forward. But I think the last thing Jonah Powell needs is to get another defeat under his belt. So my assumption is that he will walk very cautiously and carefully. Perhaps he may do some polling privately and determine whether there are opportunities for him to re-engage. And I think that if he senses that he will be going forward in anything other than uncertain steps, certain steps back into Parliament, my feeling is that he wouldn't bother. And I think he would be wise to take a decision like that, because if he goes back out now and he's beaten again, it isn't going to serve well for him. So I think what he's probably doing is saying, well, let's sit back and see if Ms. Gray Brooks is able to pull things together, and it looks as though there's an opportunity for PAM and for me as part of PAM, then maybe that I will re-engage. I think the other thing too, Andre, which is the other elephant in the room, we have to ask ourselves realistically, what opportunities does PAM have on the mainland, which is St. Kitts, because PAM exists in St. Kitts alone. There are 8 seats in St. Kitts. There is a team unity. There is a People's Labour Party that is in already existence. I don't know whether other people are of this opinion, but my certain belief is that if there's going to be any kind of victory for a non-Labour force, it has to be a situation where there is a solid coalition on St. Kitts in relation to those options. If you're saying that out of that solid coalition, you need to look at surrendering some seats, which means that there will be 4 seats that you will ultimately want to surrender. And then there will be another 4 seats that you will want to compete in. And you've already have a leader who will presumably have one of those seats, is the chairman of the party. And he appears to also want to be involved in one of those seats. You're looking at really 2 seats, and the question is whether or not he would be in pole position to get either of those. So that's the kind of complex scenario that he's looking at now. And as a result, I don't know that he can make those decisions now. The other thing is, I don't know whether PAM may say, okay, we're going to go it alone. If PAM takes a decision like that, then there's opportunities that can be considered. But my feeling is that, I believe he's probably saying, well, let's see how it goes. And then we have that discussion in a couple of years' time. If there's an opportunity to re-engage, and I will. If not, then I won't bother.
Right. Well, on that note, because that's actually a good segue into my next question, because now that PAM has a new leader, has decided to take a fresh turn, a fresh page, what does this mean for the future of the party, especially for the next election coming up? We've heard the leader saying that, there's no room. Right now, we're not thinking about coalescing with any party. We're not looking to form any coalition. We're going it alone. Do you think the People's Action Movement can go it alone and can be a formidable opposition politically in the elections, at least, against the Labour Party?
Yeah, I didn't actually realize that she said that. And actually, this conversation with you, I'm learning a lot of new things about St. Kitts politics. First it was a lawsuit, and there's now this. I didn't realize she said that. And I would say that if that's the position she's taking, she's off to a bad start. Frankly, I do not believe that PAM can win a government on its own in St. Kitts again. Probably in the future it can, but I think that in the short term, I don't believe it can, because the role of People's Labour Party will act as a spoiler. Now, it's important that she's saying this is their position at this point in time, and it's a position that may evolve over time. If, however, her position is hard and fast, that PAM is going into loan, I think that PAM will continue to suffer at the hands of the People's Labour Party, as long as the People's Labour Party can command enough support to be able to gain 1 or 2 seats. It makes it very difficult to win an election without them. My feeling is that, as was the case on the two previous occasions that PAM was in government, PAM was in government in association with the NRP. Back in the 90s, they were in government in association with the PLP most recently and did very well. I would think that the logic politically would be to try to get back to a situation like that as quickly as possible. But of course, one has to respect Ms. Graybook's capacity and her knowledge of the situation on the ground far better than I do. If she has evidence to suggest that she can go it alone, then I wish her well. The reality, however, is that if I were asked to advise her, I would say to her, look, you need to get into bed with the PLP as quickly as possible. And you know what I said? You need to get into bed with the PLP and not get into bed with Timothy Harris, because if I suggested that, her being a lady and him being a gentleman, it may have a completely different interpretation.
But not only that though, but even from a politically speaking, that is something that People's Action Movement supporters don't want to hear because of what happened in Team Unity and how that had a great collapse, and the relationship between the PLP and the PAM back in the coalition. I don't think any PAM supporter really wants that kind of union going forward.
Yeah, I mean, and I remember I had a conversation with one of your colleagues, Callistra, in another place, and I made similar suggestions, and I was wrongly chastised by members of PAM, both to my face and also behind my back. I appreciate that it's not a conversation that PAM wants to have, and I also note that within the PLP, they have already identified candidates in all 8 seats, believing that they can also form a government. But I would say the same thing to them too. I think that if you believe that this is possible, I think that it is a level of delusion under which you're suffering, that from which you need to be alleviated as quickly as possible. And I made reference to the situation in Gaza now, where Hamas believes that they can have an outright victory, and Israel believes that they can have an outright victory. And in the final analysis, they're both strong in their beliefs, and I think that they're both completely deluded. Ultimately, politics is about negotiating, and I think that they will come to a point where both sides will realize that its ideal objective is not something that is going to be achievable. And my experience in politics has taught me that in many instances, necessity forges those kinds of relationships. And you've seen successful unions in the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, in the case of Antigua and Barbuda under the UPP. In the case of the PNM, which people don't even remember was once a union of interest. It's something that happens, and in situations where it's necessary, it sticks. Now, in Trinidad and Tobago, in the UNC, the UNC has taken a position similar to PAM that it will go it alone. The chances of being able to win a government are significantly better because they actually did once. But PAM has no evidence or no record of having won a government on its own. And indeed, in the case of PLP, even less so. So I hear them, and I know that it's not an attractive proposition. And I think that the hate for Timothy Harris is such that on that side, they will believe that there's opportunity for them to go it alone. And I can say that if that's what they think, I wish them well. We'll see how it goes.
I love the Kebbi because they're real. What you see is what you get. No hidden agenda, no tricks, just real, honest communication.
Talk to us about Shawn Richards' legacy, the good and the bad.
Yeah. No, I mean, we actually spoke about this already, and I've always had a lot of time for Shawn Richards. He seems to be the kind of politician that is, what you see is what you get. He's a down-to-earth guy. He worked hard. I've heard Dr. Douglas speak kindly of him when he initially got into politics, because he seemed to be the kind of person that had an interest in people and was working hard on behalf of people and so on. And that's something that one has to admire. I don't know that he is somebody who is really cut out for high-level politics, but certainly at a very basic grassroots level, he was effective. As you quite rightly said, he entered Parliament. He represented PAM as the only MP in Parliament. He was not leader at that point in time, but he waited his time and until such time as the PLP was able to promote him, they were able, till the PAM was able to promote him to leader. And then he was able to gain the leadership from Lindsey Grant. And from that, he led the PAM back into government. So I think that his legacy would really be the person, the premier, the person who, after the former premier, would have led PAM back to political relevance again, one could argue, against the St. Kitts and Nevis Labour Party. Having said that, once in government, he became Deputy Prime Minister, and again, that was a significant achievement for him. Shawn Richards, I would say the mistakes that he made in terms of the breakup of the Team Unity will mar his legacy, in my view. And I think that as we reflect on him, people will speak less of the fact that he was the individual that led PAM back into government from the days of Sidney Simmons, Prime Minister Simmons. And I think that he is going to be remembered more as one of the main contributors to breaking up and removing the PAM from government when it was in government the second time. Up to now, I realize that there is a prevailing belief among PAM supporters that it was Timothy Harris that broke up the whole thing. But one has to remember that Timothy Harris's actions were prompted by resignations. Were prompted by terse statements that were made, very critical of a government of which they were part, that were made by two individuals, and Shawn Richards was one. So I say the legacy is mixed, but my sense is that as we reflect on him, we will think more about the mistakes and less about the fact that he was the person that led them back. But nonetheless, he has written his name on the historical pages of St. Kitts and Nevis, and I think for that, one has to commend him. He seemed to have been a person, or he was a person who came into politics in St. Kitts with an interest in helping people. He rose to the level of Deputy Prime Minister, and he is one of few people who has held that post in the country. So, good on him. And regardless of whether he runs again or not, he will be fondly remembered as being a person who was a Minister of Education. I think that as Minister of Education, he secured agreement for New Bastair High School. Again, whenever the institution is built, whenever they finally get around to it, it's possible that he'll be fondly remembered as one of the architects of that, which is going to be a leading institution of learning in St. Kitts and Nevis whenever it happens.
All right. Well, let's shift our attentions quickly to government of the day, the St. Kitts and Nevis Labour Party. They have had coming upon 2 years in government. And they recently had their convention, which, as you know, is always sometimes used as a barometer as the party support. You would have been following, you've been seeing the work of the government, and more specifically under the leadership of Prime Minister Dr. Terrance Drew. Your thoughts on the Labour Party at this time, and Dr. Drew in particular?
Yeah, I think that Dr. Drew has done reasonably well under these circumstances, but I think a lot of the I think that there are a number of people who feel that the leadership has been less exciting than it could have been. So if I were to give an objective opinion, I would say that I give him a B or a B plus in terms of his performance, probably a B. One could argue that certainly he's less inspiring than either of the two previous leaders that he's come after. But nonetheless, Dr. Drew is locked in by an important reality, and this is the fact that he is, he has no competition virtually, and the chaos and confusion in the opposition makes it difficult for him to do badly. So I would say unforced errors, perhaps there have been a few. Opportunities that have not been fully exploited, perhaps there have been a few. But I also appreciate that the turf he's batting on is not necessarily the easiest. I mean, St. Kitts and Nevis is coming out of COVID, and it's essentially trying to find a developmental path. And we were speaking about that in the earlier segment. He may have some ideas, but again, that's something that's going to take time. And then he's also dealing with the reality of a Dr. Douglas, who is very much alive and well and within the party, and still there are sections of the Labour Party that may feel that he should be the individual leading it. So when you take all of that together, I would say that, yes, there have been some enforced errors, but I think he's done okay. And that's probably the phrase that I would be most comfortable with. I don't believe the likelihood of him losing office anytime in the near future is high. I think that as you continue and you say that you have PLP offering a slate of 8, and you have PAM indicating that they're going to be contesting all 8 seats on the mainland. You have CCM dominance in Nevis. You have an NRP which is trying to get off the ground but is yet to do so, and certainly has not indicated which coalition partner it will seek an association with. It's a level of confusion in which the St. Kitts and Nevis Labour Party and Dr. Drew can only benefit. So I would say he has time. He has time to make mistakes. He has time to find himself, and presumably either this election or the next one, he will find himself very comfortably in a leadership position again.
You made the connection, or you raised the issue of Dr. Douglas and his level of popularity in the Labour Party. Considering, and we're kind of going back to the lawsuit that we spoke about earlier, he has been named in the lawsuit, Dr. Douglas in particular. And that could present a challenge for Dr. Drew, having your senior minister, former prime minister, his political mentor, who is caught up or at least been named in this lawsuit. How does he manage this and at the same time still manage the political implications that this could have within the Labour Party itself?
I would say, look back at the history of Dr. Douglas, the passport case, allegations that were made regarding the SIDF. There were other, one could say, scandals, mini and maxi scandals in the Labour Party administration over the years. Dr. Douglas always lands on his feet. There's a sense that Dr. Douglas can walk on water for some people. And I would say to anyone who is concerned about this most recent controversy, it's not the first time. I think that the mess that was created when citizenship was being sold externally in the case of St. Kitts and Nevis under the old scheme, where persons were walking into an embassy and walking out with citizenship. I think that had the potential to be a lot more damaging, and Dr. Douglas rose above that as well. Dr. Douglas took a passport from Dominica, and up to now he hasn't explained, why he would have done something like that, where he knows full well that you can't have another citizenship in the case of St. Kitts. He resigned from Parliament, or he was forced to resign from Parliament. He contested the seat again, and he won. I mean, look, that to me speaks volumes about the extent to which any of these things are going to damage Dr. Douglas. If you love Dr. Douglas, then you will continue to love him. And to some extent, he's like Donald Trump. There are people who love him, there are people who hate him, but ultimately, I don't know that by saying that this is another dent in his armor, it's going to affect his popularity significantly. So I believe if you poll him today, he'll be as popular as he was yesterday, even though people know what they know about his involvement in this matter, because there have been other matters that he's been involved in, and he was able to rise above them easily. And I mean, Andre, you know better than I do the number of times Dr. Douglas's name has come up in various other matters that would be impolite for us to speak of at this point in time. And he's always been able to land on his feet. So Teflon, perhaps, that is the reality.
You're saying then in this case, Dr. Drew should just wait and see rather than take any action?
Well, I think that Dr. Drew is in a comfortable position where he doesn't have to do anything because he's prime minister and will probably remain prime minister for a while to come. I don't really know that he needs to see Dr. Douglas as a threat that he needs to dislodge. If I were him, I would just let him rest and see how it goes. And I made that comparison because I look at the Antigua and Barbuda situation where, and I'm not suggesting that the Asset Michael and Dr. Douglas have anything in common, but you have an individual like Asset Michael who is a very colorful politician and also a very popular politician. One could argue that Prime Minister Brown was well advised to leave Asset Michael alone as a member of Parliament. And not bother him, because ultimately he can be a lot more dangerous to you if he's not there. What essentially Prime Minister Brown decided is that he was going to cut him loose and he was going to take him on full frontal. He almost lost the government as a result of it. So my sense is that Dr. Drew can learn from those mistakes. And my thing is, if Dr. Douglas is willing to be a member of the government of St. Kitts and Nevis, or indeed if he's not even a member of the government, he's a member of Parliament and he's happy with that, then I would say just leave him. There are bigger fish to fry. more important fish to fry. And I think that you should, well, you say grill, because these days grilled fish is probably more healthy. And if I were Dr. Drew, I would just continue grilling the fish that I have there, and I would let Dr. Douglas relax. Dr. Douglas is not a spring chicken. And I think that in a matter of time, he would decide that he's had enough of politics and he'd be ready to move on. By that time, Dr. Drew could have been Prime Minister for 15 years and be looking at a 20-year run in the same way that Dr. Douglas had a 20-year run.
Before we go, we definitely have to talk about the People's Labour Party. But as you pointed out earlier, the PLP by themselves cannot win enough seats to form a government. What is the future of the PLP, and how long can Dr. Harris hold out as a leader of the party? Do you see a situation where they will have to transition to another leader eventually, or will he be there at the helm for some time to come?
Well, I think without a leader, without Dr. Harris, the PLP is a non-entity. I don't believe that the PLP has the ability to gain ascendancy as an entity in and of itself, as an alternative to PAM, without the presence of Timothy Harris. My feeling is that if Dr. Harris decides to go after the next election or before the next election, I suspect that the PLP will go with him, and you go back to the old conversation of just a PAM. That's my feeling. What he brought to the PLP is the opportunity to lead. And the PLP has the record of basically having been elected as the party with the Prime Minister twice. And I think that that's something which a young party would want to be able to say, look, we can hold on to this and we can go forward. I do feel that the next election is going to be an important test for the PLP. And I think that the future has a lot to do with their decision to go into coalition, effective coalition, airtight, sealed up coalition with the People's Action Movement. If the PLP goes into this election and it doesn't make that decision, and then it is unable to materialize electorally, I believe that that's the end of it. But I suspect that as the election date draws closer, attitudes towards coalition will change substantially and will soften. And I think that will really be the future. So my feeling is the next election is do or die. I don't believe that Dr. Harris has many more elections left in him. And I think that he would want to make sure that any next one, he makes some kind of impact, which is entirely possible. But as I said, he can't do it alone, in my view. And I think that at a level, he probably understands that, because he's shrewd enough politically to understand that any 8 candidates that he identifies now may very well have to be negotiated away. And, my position when people always say this is that when you look at the Prime Minister, is like the Almighty, and in his house are many rooms. And if there are persons who want to be candidates within the People's Labour Party and they are denied the opportunity to do so, and the People's Labour Party triumphs, Dr. Harris can make provision for them in any one of his rooms, in the way that number of people from the PAM entity in the past who were unable to materialize politically got themselves into comfortable positions at various places. So to me, if this is a logic that people are willing to accept, it makes a whole lot more sense for them to look at it in that way. And that to me is the future of PLP.